Warning: this show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewers' discretion is advised. This show may contain strong language and sensitive or controversial topics. We are not attorneys and are not providing legal advice. The views and conversations are our own thoughts and feelings, and therefore, purely speculation.
The entertainment world and beyond.
Skywalker air miles, feeding on a surface, glide on water, constricted and conflicted.
Welcome to Purely Speculation, a show that exposes the harmful effects of the criminal legal system. I'm your host, Heather Lewis, the Executive Director of the Reuniting Family Bail Fund and practitioner of participatory defense. On this show, you'll learn about the unspoken horrors of the criminal justice system and meet fierce allies and advocates. We will make the best of our traumatic experiences. We will get angry. We may even cry. We most certainly going to laugh, but one thing's for sure, we're going to keep it real. Welcome to Purely Speculation.
When they free my sins and let them loose, they was killing me, I got scars to prove, got me paralyzed, I could even barely move. Out the way I took the pain again. Yeah. How I fall in love with pain.
Hey, good evening. Welcome to the volume 2 of the Court Watch edition of Purely Speculation. We've got Scotty, one of our regular court watchers, here tonight with us. And we have a special guest, special in more ways than one, but this guest is a Norristown native, a professor at Shippensburg University, and the older brother of our Court Watch alum, Scotty. Welcome to the show, Dr. Raymond Janifer, Senior, Professor Emeritus of Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Janifer, welcome.
Hey, good evening, everybody.
Welcome. And thank you for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to join us tonight. And before we get into the case that we're going to talk about, I want to read something from a paper that you've been working on for some time now. And it starts like this. They left home in the prime of their lives. Former high school football, basketball, and track stars, and pretty boys with slick back hair, fancy dance steps, and returned 2 years later with vacant eyes, dirty clothes, itching and scratching, and extremely paranoid, only coming out at night, lurking in and out of the shadows. Dr. Janifer, you refer to the Vietnam War, and when a lot of our young men, in particularly men of color, were shipped off and drafted to Vietnam. And so we're here tonight to talk about Robert Fisher. And Robert Fisher is a victim of Quadruple Jeopardy. Can you please take us back to your early recollections of Robert Fisher and his military service that goes unnoticed and unspoken about when he has been tried 5 times?
Well, he's one of the guys from the neighborhood, and I've known him since we were in elementary school. He came from actually a better part of the East End on East Basin Street, 2-parent home, nice house. But something happened in junior high, like it happens to a lot of young black men. He got hooked up with the wrong people. And so for a long time, I thought he was a winehead and he was into gangbanging. But then this purge of Vietnam came along, and that when that war hit, what it did was it swept up those of us that were born between 1964 and 1970. And the only way you could get away is to go to college. And at that point, African-American men, some went to college, but the numbers were very small. And so he got swept up and he got drafted into the Army. And I don't know what happened to him when he went in the Army, but he served 4 years of meritorious service in the Army. And then decided, someone told me earlier, the Marine Corps recruited him because of his combat skills. And then he enlisted in the Marines and became part of a special unit called a kill unit. They were called the Walking Dead.
Wow.
and they went into Mortal Kombat almost on a daily basis. The other thing that happened to a lot of those young black men who were taken to the jungles of Southeast Asia was the curse of drugs. A lot of them had never been in combat before, and as a way of coping, you know, the opium was very cheap over there and very strong. And so a lot of them came home with drug habits. And I'm suspecting that Bobby is what we used to call him, came home with a drug habit, which made him very vulnerable to the criminal underground.
Right.
Because he had to have that drug. And then there were certain people out there that were manipulating that to have him do certain things for them. But I did not know, and I don't know if Scotty knew or not, about his meritorious service in the Vietnam War. I think you have a graphic there of President Lyndon Johnson putting a Purple Heart around Robert's neck.
Yes, and that's something that they don't talk about at all, or as I was reading in your paper, that he did when he was first tried, that he did talk about his experience in the war, his PTSD. So before Scotty, and maybe you can speak a little bit to this. So the PTSD that he suffered, I mean, the horrors that they experience in war, in combat. I mean, Vietnam all the way up until present day, we have servicemen and women that are coming home suffering from PTSD and other effects and traumas of the war. Can you speak a little bit to how, I mean, this when we first started talking about this, when you said he was in the Army and in the Marines, I was just like, wait a minute, like how does that happen? Can you talk a little bit to how one gets discharged from the Army and gets recruited to the Marines?
Yes. I don't know, because one of the reasons that I went to college is to avoid being drafted.
Right, and so he went back for another tour.
You know, doing a tour and then coming out and then searching another 4 years. To me, it kind of speaks to a person that's a pretty dedicated, patriotic individual.
Right.
And that culminates with Johnson putting the medal around his neck. And everything I've read about Fisher in the criminal justice system, they never refer to him as a decorated veteran.
Right.
It's always double murderer, serving life. You know, they act as though he didn't have a life until there was a crime committed.
Right.
So the kind of good parts of his character haven't been discussed.
All right. And that's what we're here to discuss today. This, when we were kind of prepping for the show, Scotty's familiar with this term, a social bio packet. And this is essentially what we're here to do tonight is to kind of put on record the highlights of who Robert Fisher is, because he's still living. He's one of the few people involved in this case that are still living. And so Scotty, tell us about Bobby from when you knew him back then and the conversation that you had last week with him in the courthouse.
Yeah, I've known Bobby since I was about 8 years old. He used to take us up to the basketball court, shoot basketball with us, tell us the do's and don'ts of the street, because at that time, Bobby was like about 12 years old or 13 years old, but he was far advanced for his age. And at that time, we knew nothing about who was in the street, what the street was about. And when we got up to junior high school, he was going to high school. And when we start being knuckleheads, as young kids in junior high school do sometime, he was the guy, he would catch you on the basketball court and say, I heard you was with so-and-so and so-and-so. You don't need that. But then when I got to the high school, I found out that he had got roped up into a different crew. And we were at a football game. They had a big ride at the football game. And he wound up doing some county time. They did 90 days or whatever. Him and 3 or 4 other guys did 90 days. And when he came home, the first person he came to was me that I know of. He said, He said, hey, I did this. You're where you need to be. get that doggone diploma. He said, I know these guys is pulling. He said, because I see these guys talking to you. He said, get that high school diploma and stay away from these guys that he was into. But he didn't want us to be bothered because he knew that was a bad path.
Right. So he had some wisdom and some, looking out for the younger kids, saying, don't do this. Don't follow in my footsteps. This is not the way to go.
Yeah. And he explained to us that what he did, he had to do because of some situations that finally start happening at his house.
Right.
So he had to do what he had to do to make it and take care of his little sister.
And the limited skills set that he had, which led him to join the military, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And
well, that used to be the only opportunity you had. Right. If you missed the college boat,
right,
you went to the military.
Yeah. Or you didn't do anything. And
or you went to the mill.
Right. You went to the steel mill or Allenwood Steel or Lee Tires or the state hospital to get a job.
Right.
And so he went into the military and he found his niche, apparently, because he was the guy. I mean, he saved his battalion. I mean, and when he joined the Marines, they recruited him to join the Marines because of his skill set. And he did 3 years in the Marines. And the only reason he came home is because they bombed him. He was coming through, open a path for the rest of his guys to come take a certain place, and they threw a bomb and he rolled over on the bomb so the rest of his guys wouldn't get killed. And like he said, it's a wonder he didn't get killed. He saved 14 guys' lives. And so when he came home, he was already hooked. He had got that heroin over there. Like he said, I couldn't sleep. He said, they only gave you 2 hours a night to sleep. He said, and if you didn't get those 2 hours, he said, you might be up 48, 68 hours at a time. And he said, you're dealing with rats and all kind of scorpions and all kind of things that will hamper who you are and what you do. So that's where, that PTSD came in. And to acquire that, they start using drugs. It's going to bring them down, give them a chance to sleep, and keep the jitters away from you. And that's how he got hooked.
Wow, that's sad to take for that to happen to someone who was that dedicated and committed to his community, or to his country rather, that when he came home, yes, they gave him the highest award or Medal of Honor, or the Purple Heart, but also, Dr. Janifer, you say in your paper also that they did not provide him any vocational skills. Exactly. So talk to me a little bit about that, because this is one thing, and I'll find it very interesting. And I'm going to talk about Brittany Griner, because we talked about this, Scotty and I a couple of weeks ago when we were reading an article about when Brittany Griner got released. She did 10 months in a Russian prison, and in reading that article, they offered her courses and therapy and all, like, I forget exactly what they called it. I should have wrote it down. But they are literally recognizing the trauma that she would have experienced in doing 10 months in a Russian prison that they don't offer to American people coming out of prison after doing 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. And so here we have a war veteran who has been critically wounded, has all these traumas of being in that horrible place. And they offered him absolutely nothing to work through his PTSD, to give him skills to take care of himself or his family and survive and deal with all of the traumas of being in Vietnam. So as an educator, professor, talk to me about that and the consequences.
We come from a generation when if you were an African-American male, they were afraid of you at school. So if you weren't totally cooperative, you went to general or you went to special ed. But no one talked to you about, well, what's going to happen after school? Do you want to go to a HBCU? You just kind of existed there and the school functioned around you. So someone said Robert Fisher had limited skills. Let us not forget that he's been acting as his own counsel for quite a few times.
That's correct.
And he's beaten the legal system based on his research, based on the briefs that he's written.
That's right.
So the man was brilliant, but he was never able to develop his academic skills in the Norristown School District.
Right.
And so when he left school, you know, the options were extremely limited. You know, you go and you work in industry at the lowest end as a laborer, or you go to the service.
Right.
But I would argue that for him being able to beat those death penalty cases based on his own research and writing, we're dealing with an extremely bright person who has a very high understanding of the American legal system.
Absolutely.
Correct. And
So,
he told me that the reason why they kept going after him is because they know he was not the guy, but the young lady's parents kept on them so tough that they had to have somebody to present to these people. And they kept after him, knowing fair well that a roommate who was a friend of his, who was also addicted to drugs, who had also came back from Vietnam, was the actual person that this crime was committed by. But because of him being the boyfriend of the young lady who was murdered, and that she became a CI and was cooperating with the police because of another murder that happened before this, then they wanted him.
right.
Well, I think we also can't forget the optics in this case. There are very few cases where an African-American male is accused of homicide against a European-American female, and he's not found guilty.
Correct.
And I think a decision was made early on that someone was going to pay for this young woman's death.
Right. This is their guy. So Dr. Janifer, so you've done the research. We've been kind of following, Scotty and I have been kind of following the case. We were in communication with his representation from the public defender's office prior to this particular trial. I think back in March with Carrie Ullman, we've worked, with her and talked with her. She is, extremely vigilant in trying to get justice for folks, coming through the public defender's office, but with limited resources. And actually that trial resulted in a hung jury. Can you give me somewhat of a chronological happenstance of his first trial? Because like we talked about, he's been convicted twice, but his expertise and dedication to researching the laws in his case and the transcripts, that he was actually had two of those overturned.
Yeah.
And so kind of take us through that a little bit.
Well, the amazing thing to me is he hasn't actually been found guilty of murder yet.
Correct.
But he served 42 years. And your average term to be incarcerated in a murder case is 20 years. So he sat there for twice that amount of time. And he has, in this last trial, he was found guilty.
Right.
So, I mean, when you go to sentence this young man, you're going to give him another murder sentence of 20 years. So he's going to do 62 years for this murder.
Right.
And other people that were involved in his situation, they've done their time and they're home and they're walking the streets of Norristown.
Right.
After doing 20 years.
Right.
So why would you give this man 60 years?
And on that note, before we go into a video, because Scotty and I attended the trial about 2 weeks ago, and we were able to see Bobby Fisher, and Scotty was able to talk to him. But I want to read another excerpt from your paper. that just really kind of resonated with me and to anyone else that is incarcerated. And for those that don't know or have a loved one that has ever been incarcerated, that this kind of gives you a visual of what incarceration looks and feels like. And I'll quote you: if you were later locked away in a 9x6 cell on death row for over 25 years, allowed out into a cage not much bigger than a dog run for 1 hour a day, and allowed 1 shower a week, would you slowly descend into mental illness as your relatives died off and your mail became more infrequent, your commissary money dwindled, and visitors became rare? Can we take a look at Mr. Fisher after he has served 42 years of incarceration, trying to get him justice and working with him? So we have a video of him right before the jury deliberated, and we'll talk about the jury deliberation with Scotty when we come back, because he was actually in the room when the judge gave them their instructions, gave the jury their instructions. So let's see that video of Robert Fisher from about 2 weeks ago. Good afternoon, Mr. Fisher. You have anything to say about your 5th attempt at a conviction?
No.
All right, we can do our best to tell your story. So that was Mr. Fisher coming out of the courtroom right after after Judge Eisenberg. We're gonna call him out, and we're gonna call him out a couple times.
Right.
After Judge Eisenberg gave the jury instructions. Scotty, tell us. Read us the room. Tell us how you read the room, how you read the jury, who was in the room, because we talked about this. Now people are saying this is his 5th trial. So we talked about people that were involved, witnesses and things being deceased at this point. So talk to us quickly about what the trial kind of looked like, what the jury looked like, the judge's instructions, and then we'll get into the verdict.
It looked like everybody had took sleeping pills.
Why do you say that?
Because the jury was
How
not.
many people were in the room? How many people were in the room?
3 people. Because, well, Monday there was about 8, but by Wednesday, the day they were going to do the verdict, there was 3 people. They said they couldn't come back. They said it was so unprofessional. It was dull. There was nothing exciting about it. I don't know what they were looking for, but the jury was nodding and blowing. One guy, juror number 11, slept halfway through the 3rd day of the trial. He was actually asleep. The judge had to keep moving up and down to keep himself awake. And Bobby the whole time is sitting there taking notes, giving his lawyers papers and whatnot, but there was no cross-examine. Everything was by paper, because everybody that had anything to do with this trial is deceased. Everybody that had anything to do with this trial is deceased.
So essentially, the prosecutor read transcripts, the defense read transcripts. They didn't introduce any new evidence. They didn't have any witnesses. There weren't any witnesses on the stand. There was no testimony of any kind by anyone. The only people speaking were the prosecution reading their transcripts and the defense attorneys reading their transcripts. So
Right.
No opportunity for cross-examination. You can't cross-examine a piece of paper.
Right.
You can't refute or bring up any issues about the testimony. If there's questions about, we talked about there was some evidence that was found here or there. We don't know exactly where it came from or why it was there, or, there's a lot of questions that were brought up or that we have that there's nobody to ask. And you made a very valid point about, first, give me the demographic. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Give me the demographic of the jury, and then you keep bringing up the fact that the living versus the paper that they're able to come out with a verdict.
Right. There were 6 white men, 5 white women, 1 Spanish woman. Okay. When the judge gave them the offer or what they needed, the instructions for what they needed to do to come up with the murder, they were looking at each other and, you know, like they did not understand the instructions that he was giving them. And they're looking at each other and nobody's asking him, well, could you go over that again? We don't understand. Nothing. By then, though, number 11 was awake, but nobody understood what was going on.
Right.
And
the conviction.
When Bobby was telling the lawyer, when they had different people, the prosecution had different people reading different transcripts from his first 2 trials. And when he was telling them that, you know, hey, that's not right. You need to check her that she can't use that, or this person can't use that. And the judge said, hey, they're reading the transcript. So there's no way that you can cross-examine anybody for what it's worth to help your case.
And when the judge sent the jury out to deliberate, that's when we captured the video of Mr. Fisher coming out. We expected to come back the next day because it was late in the day. It was about 3:15, 3:30.
Right.
The judge said, I'll give you till 4:30 and then we'll reconvene. And tell us what happened.
Mr. Fisher came out. We came out. We were getting ready to leave and come back, okay, at 4:30 to see what was going on. And within 20 minutes, he was found guilty. They couldn't find him guilty, okay, with actual people, but in 20 minutes, they found him guilty with a piece of paper.
Right.
And he went off. He went off in the courtroom.
Let's give, and I'm gonna let you paraphrase. So we do, and I apologize that I'm jumping around a little bit, but you know I get excited, and so I'm gonna take this opportunity for you to share Bobby Fisher's "what the fuck" moment.
Yeah, and his "what the fuck" moment was, how can you find me guilty in 20 minutes if you ain't a racist bunch of motherfuckers? No good, motherfuckers, that you find me guilty. You couldn't find me guilty with live bodies, but you find me guilty with a piece of paper. He said, now, if that's not racist, he says, I don't know what is. He said, and if it's not the fact that you keep doing it and are allowed to keep doing it till you get it right, he says, where do I get justice? He said, I've done everything. He said, where do I get justice? He says, I sit in that cell 23 hours a day. He says, when do I get justice? You're looking for people who are deceased, but you don't look at me for who I am.
Right.
That's my picture.
Right. And that's such a powerful statement on so many levels. You know, the jury has to do better. They have a duty. They get sworn in. They have a duty to seek justice and to ask questions and not use their bias. But Dr. Janifer, I want you to weigh in because we talked about, you know, you gave this title, the Quadruple Jeopardy. So there were 2 motions or appeals that Bobby put in. Can you talk to us about those things that got his conviction overturned?
Well, they were procedural things.
By the prosecution and the judge, not by the defense. I'll just want to add that.
Yeah, by the way they went about things. And if I'm not mistaken, there's going to be some issues with this 4th or 5th trial, simply because you convicted a man of murder in the first degree on paper. If we took this particular show and we put it on paper and we had someone read it, it would sound and feel tremendously different than watching it.
Right.
And in literature, we call that semiotics. It's not just what you say, it's how you say something that communicates what it is that you're trying to say. And that paper did not have any semiotics. So you send somebody who's a boring reader up there to read that witness statement, somebody that doesn't read well, someone that doesn't understand the context of what they're reading.
Right.
Right. They just want to get through it.
Right.
And you know how people are self-conscious when you call on them to read in public.
Right.
Right. So, you know, you got a man that's 42 years in whose life depended upon how well these people read, and they're not even dramatic actors.
Right.
So that that part bothers me. And then the issue about interrogation. You can say whatever you want about me, but my defense team should be able to question you about it.
Absolutely.
What proof do you have about that?
Absolutely.
And in a lot of instances, procedurally, I don't know, you know, what the efficacy of that situation is. The other thing that happens here is if he's already done 42 years, and each time that sentence was overturned because of procedural errors, in the law, they have a concept which is called double jeopardy. If I get off on a murder one time, you can't bring me back and try me again for that very same murder.
Amen.
And this guy is being tried 4 or 5 times for the same murder that, according to the court system, he hasn't been found guilty of. So when you sentence him, you're going to give him another 20 years. So he's going to do 60 years. And 40 of those years, he was not even found guilty. And he's 76 years old.
Right. And to that point, you were very accurate in saying that there's a lot of gems in the paper that you've been working on. And so you will work out your commission after the show. But I'm going to read another quote, and it speaks to exactly what you said. And after his 4th trial that Fisher experienced the hung jury, the Montgomery County DA, Kevin Steele, says that he intends to try him a 5th time, which was just 2 weeks ago that he was tried the 5th time. And our question is, should you be able to prosecute someone 5 times or more for the same murder, especially if the person who alleged to have committed the crime has been released? So that speaks to one, Kevin Steele's method or foundation for his practice in the Montgomery County DA's office, is that they will continue to try you regardless of your innocence. They will continue to try you until they got the right formula of jury that will come back with a conviction, right?
Well, he did the same thing with the Cosby case.
Exactly. Bill Cosby, prime example. I don't know if he's trying to raise his funds or waiting for the next funding cycle, because he had vowed to try Cosby again. But I overheard folks saying that trial cost so much money that they haven't recouped it yet. So he hasn't brought him. When they got enough coins, they're going to try Bill Cosby again.
Well, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court told him he better not try. Okay. Prayerfully, he'll be gone. They told him he cannot try Cosby again. But we wish we had somebody who would have said, you can't try Bobby Fisher again.
Right.
Because the whole thing is, it boosts his conviction rate. But his thing now is that you beat me all these times and I'm not going to let you go.
Right.
And that's what they did to Bobby. You keep doing it till you get it right. But we had nothing to help Bobby with because you got all the coins in your cash drawer. And
Right.
he's dealing with a public defender who was fighting a piece of paper. It was a no-win. There was
Right.
no way he was going to walk out there, okay, with another win. They weren't going to let that happen.
Right. And so what we're asking for at this stage of the game, again, like, you know, if Eisenberg doesn't come back with the appropriate sentence, and we'll talk about that, you know, Dr. Janifer had alluded to that there are some issues with this recent conviction. What are you asking? Because Todd Eisenberg is the judge that will be issuing the sentence. We don't know when that's going to be. We have people in the wings that kind of keeping an eye on this, when his sentencing hearing is going to come up. But what do you think Judge Eisenberg should do in the spirit of justice? As
Well, if I was able to speak to Judge Eisenberg as an advocate, I'd remind him about the average sentence for murder in Pennsylvania, and that Robert had already done this twice without being convicted. Now you come to this third, fourth, and fifth trial, which to me smells of a kangaroo court, and you're going to sentence this man. I mean, if the justice system really works the way that it should be, he should be sentenced to time served. But I think they might be scared, because if they release him and he hasn't been adjudicated guilty, he's going to have a hell of a case against the state for illegal incarceration.
Amen.
So they're trying to cover all their bases. But a judge in a truly legal system would have to take into consideration those 42 years that this man has already served.
Right.
And what good would it do to pile 20 more years on top of that?
Right.
When there's still that question out there of his innocence or guilt.
Right. Right. And Scotty, we're going to get your thought, or what you would have to say to Judge Eisenberg. And Dr. Janifer, I would challenge you to formulate your what the fuck moment. It doesn't have to be regarding this case. It could be about the criminal and justice system in general, or, you know, just what bothers you, or what's good. Like sometimes it's like, what the fuck? Like we just really won, you know, like Dallas. But go ahead, Scotty, talk about your comment, or what would you say to Judge Eisenberg?
I would say pretty much similar to what Dr. Janifer said. The man has served time for 3 murders, okay, and that he did not commit, or was not found guilty, or had overturned. Don't you think that at this stage of his life, he's 76 years old, that his stage of his life, after all the time that he has spent, that he at least deserves a time served? Like he said, when do I get justice? He said, everybody's looking for justice for everybody else. He said, and everybody else is dead. He said, and other people that were connected to this on my end, or on the prosecution's case, okay, are walking the street. They've been out. He said, but you keep holding on to me because you want to get justice for dead people. He said, when do you give justice to Robert Fisher?
Right.
And my thing to him would be, give that man time served and let him go home. He has one family member left. Let him go home to that family member.
Right. Amen. Amen. Dr. Janifer.
Well, it seems to me that Montgomery County is really interested in satisfying the revenge motive of the Rowden family. Don't you worry. One of these black men are going to go to jail for killing your daughter.
Right.
But my what the fuck moment is, do you know that to keep a young black man incarcerated in a prison, if you took that same money, you could pay for him to go to Harvard for a year?
How about
So
that?
every time you incarcerate one of those young black men, you take away almost all of the opportunity for them to get a higher education. But I don't want to indict white people for that. You know, a lot of this has to do with black people and the way we raise our kids.
Right.
The thing about it is that if we don't direct our own achievement and we don't ascribe for achievement on our own, it's not going to happen. You know, there's no rescue boat out there for young black men other than other young black men who direct them the right way. Scotty mentioned earlier about Bobby telling him to stay away from the thugs. When I was on the street in Norristown, older guys would direct you away from all that trouble.
Right.
They would get in your face and say, hey, you don't want me to talk to Nita, which was our mother, about you hanging around out here. Now you're giving them drugs to sell to people.
Right, right. They're recruiting younger and younger.
Letting them watch acts of prostitution take place in their home.
Right.
So we need to do a self-help program on ourselves because we are some skillful people, particularly when we want to be.
Right.
But
you don't have a choice to be.
Yeah, but our skills have been suppressed for so long, and we're quick to kill each other.
Right.
When a black person kills somebody, it's usually another black person. And that speaks to a certain level of self-hatred rather than uplift and love, where we could kind of carry each other along.
Right.
And until we reverse that and stop feeding that criminal justice system those billions of dollars, because all those new prisons they've built them for us.
Yes, they did.
We're the inmates and they're the guardians, and they get the salaries and they send their kids to college and they become administrators, and then we come out and we're the laborers.
Right.
So we're hustling backwards. So we need to be thinking about that.
Yeah, that's deep. And you have a book that you wanted to share with us, something that you were reading?
It was one that I was reading when I was researching Robert Fisher's case. It's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And it just tells how the system is using the incarceration of young black men to economically underwrite all of these other programs. But they don't use that money to underwrite programs to help us get through the educational system.
Right.
And they tell, I'm sorry. They tell us we're upstate. They bring the captains bring their kids in, and their kids bring their kids in, and they let you know that this is our groceries. When you're here, as long as we keep you here, there's going to be a job for my son, for my grandson, for my cousin, or whatever. And we do the products that they sell to make the prison what they are. They sell clothes, shoes, and stuff that they pay us 15 cents an hour for, but they sell them on the street or wherever for a pair of shoes for $60, $70. We make a pair of shoes in 2 hours and we got 30 cents.
And that's the Prison Industrial Corporation.
That's their thing.
We keep feeding it.
We keep putting our head in the lion's mouth and it gets eaten up.
And they keep making stricter and stricter laws, longer and longer sentences.
Right. And that could be a whole nother show, because just like the war on drugs, we're now going to start to see the war on guns. And they are, I mean, I think the sentencing for, drugs back in the 80s, I mean, guns can't be any more harsher than that, because they were, I mean, we know folks now that are still serving 20-year sentences from, drug convictions in the 80s. And so it's like the cycle continues, and it's just whatever the vice is at the moment. And guns have gotten our young people believing they can do things and believing that they can, have do-overs like it's a video game, and it's not something that can continue to happen. And I thank you for sharing that as we get into our closing, about our education and about addressing the trauma that we have as families, Black families, and the loss that we have from some of those, from the wars and from the drugs and all of these things, the social ills that have affected the Black family and have torn it apart. Like you said, Dr. Janifer, we can't blame all of this on white folks. Some of it is of our own doing. The devil ain't doing everything. Sometimes we have to accept responsibility for our part in poor decision making and just getting caught up. But at some point, we have to accept the responsibility for our actions and our people and our families, our economics, our education. And that's part of the reason why we do this show. That's why we do the court watching. That's why we're advocating for folks that are fighting criminal cases, because just like they're doing Bobby Fischer, they're doing the same thing to every other Black male, female, and our children that come through these systems. So we want this to be educational. We want it to be inspirational knowledge, so that when you know better, you do better. And so we just want to kind of end on that note. Dr. Janifer, I thank you for being here. I hope that you will come back and be another guest. Prayerfully, we'll be talking about the time served for Bobby Fischer. We'll definitely have a show about that when we see the outcome of this case. Everyone, we thank you for joining in. We thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Share this podcast with folks. If you like something, share something. And for that, we thank you for joining and tuning in to Volume 2 of the Court Watch episode. And this one is unique because it's Quadruple Jeopardy. And we thank you, Scotty and Dr. Janifer, for joining us and sharing the story of your childhood friend, Bobby Fischer.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for having us. And let people know that we're still out here doing what we need to do to try and keep the things relevant for us as far as the justice system is concerned.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Purely Speculation. If you learned something, share something. Please like, follow, and share this show. The more our communities know, the more they are empowered, and the faster we can create change. Purely Speculation would not be made possible without the generous support of the Community Justice Exchange, the Health Sparks Frank E. Boston Black Justice Fund, Philadelphia Foundation, and Reform Alliance. Thank you. Booyah.
Intuition different, already lived and dreamt it. Visions make my vision clear as I'm jogging through this fog of life. I be fog light with the fog set, body and I'm all set. Baby, can you be